At the center of the world lay the White Wasteland, a land whispered to be home to dreadful creatures. There was talk of a white serpent said to devour glaciers, a gray bear that could shake the earth itself, and a vile rat that poisoned the seas. Yet, despite these terrors, an emperor who had once returned alive from that frozen land had claimed that the most dangerous thing there was not the monsters themselves, but the wasteland itself. Shifting to another scene, barbarians could be seen locked in battle with a monster. Watching them, the protagonist remarked with clear disdain that only barbarians would wear their ignorance so proudly. Standing nearby, a girl looked at him with curiosity and asked what ignorant meant, wondering aloud if it was something one could eat. At her question, the protagonist let out a weary sigh and dismissed it with a short response, telling her to forget it. Soon after, he turned serious and scolded them about food, reminding them that he had specifically warned not to eat something dangerous because it was poisonous. Yet he discovered that the girl had already eaten all of it in less than a week. Startled, she stammered before claiming it had been a noble challenge. The protagonist shook his head, frustrated, asking how she could say such a thing as if it were something to be proud of. Suddenly, a barbarian cried out in panic, calling Greta's name. Greta had collapsed to the ground, unresponsive. Another rushed to her side, desperately trying to shake her awake, shouting for her to get up. The protagonist, watching the scene unfold, thought to himself that this was not the kind of outcome he wanted. The story then shifted, describing the path to a world of fantasy. A young man was shown standing upon a mountain peak, reflecting on his journey. In a world filled with wonder and magic, he had quit his job and set out in search of something greater. He had climbed the tallest mountain on Earth, reached the very center of the planet, and even made it to the southernmost point of the globe. Yet nothing extraordinary had ever happened. It was the furthest thing from the fantasy he had been hoping for. Every night, he prayed that when he woke, he would find himself in the middle of a dream. Eventually, that prayer was answered. Later, could be seen traveling with their belongings through the frozen land. One of them cursed loudly, complaining about the unbearable cold. Their leader sternly told them to wrap up tighter unless they wished to freeze to death. Another member quickly assured him that he was already doing so. As the group pressed on through the frozen wasteland, one of the team members voiced his doubts to the captain. He admitted that no matter how great the reward was, the journey itself was pure foolishness. Crossing the White Wasteland, he said, was insanity. The captain firmly reminded him that everyone had agreed to this mission. The man muttered in return that they hadn't known it would turn out to be like this. Elsewhere, a gentleman, shivering in the cold, turned to address the princess he was accompanying. He cursed softly about the freezing temperature before clearing his throat and asking if she was all right. The princess assured him she was fine. She was introduced as Milina of the Akasha family. Even as she said she was fine, her attention was caught by the voices of their freezing guides outside. Looking through, she saw her employees struggling and complaining loudly in the cold. She noted how rude their words sounded, but then reminded her attendant not to be too harsh, since these guides were the only ones willing to lead them across the wasteland. Still, she wondered if they should bring them inside, as they looked nearly frozen solid. Her attendant quickly refused, saying she knew what dwelled within the White Wasteland. Milina repeated the thought to herself. Monsters. Then she recounted an old story. Long ago, there was an emperor who had sought to claim the entire world, setting his sights on conquering the White Wasteland. He led countless soldiers into that land, even entering it himself. Years passed, and after his empire had collapsed and faded from memory, the emperor returned alone. He was broken, decades older, and spoke as if he had lost his sanity. He claimed there were monsters in the wasteland, but the greatest danger was not them. It was the barbarians who lived there. Her attendant dismissed the tale as just a legend. Milina disagreed, pointing out that the emperor's words had weight, since many of the monsters he described were later confirmed to be real. Still, her attendant reminded her that no one had ever actually seen a barbarian. She admitted that was true. Meanwhile, the captain halted his team, raising a hand and telling everyone to stop. He sensed something ahead. When a member asked what it was, the captain squinted and admitted he couldn't see clearly. Another step forward with both good and bad news. The good news was that whatever it was appeared to be small. The bad news was that it was moving toward them. A silhouette emerged, a man walking calmly through the snow. One of the team members muttered in shock, wondering if he could be a barbarian. The stranger introduced himself casually, saying he had come out for a stroll, tired of looking at other barbarians, and unexpectedly stumbled upon outsiders. He called it luck and admitted he hadn't expected to run into anyone in such a place. He revealed his name as the Ashen Barbarian, Keel, and greeted them. Looking over the group, he asked if they were merchants. Nervously, they replied that they were. The group stared at the newcomer in shock, realizing who he was. They asked him if he assumed they were simply hire guards. The captain confirmed it quietly. The barbarian, Keel, considered the situation and bluntly advised them to turn back, though he doubted they actually would. His words left everyone uneasy. Noticing the carriage behind them, Keel asked if someone was inside. The captain's expression hardened with anger at the question, but Keel only smiled and said he wished to be hired as well. His words were met with disbelief and irritation, as the group demanded what he meant. Keel clarified, reminding them that he was offering to help them cross the wasteland. The captain was unsettled, wondering if this legendary barbarian truly wished only to join them. He asked if Keel was hostile. Keel replied with confidence, saying that if he were, they would all already be dead. The captain's men exchanged uneasy whispers, while inside the carriage the princess and her attendant listened. The attendant, shaken, asked if she had heard his words, and she quietly admitted she had. The captain approached the carriage window to ask for her decision. He explained that the barbarian wished to be hired as a mercenary and asked what she wanted to do. The princess considered the situation carefully. She pointed out that fighting him would likely not end in their favor, and for that reason, she would not recommend it. She then ordered the captain to accept his request. The captain returned to Keel and gave him the answer. Keel smiled, pleased with the outcome, calling it great news. Then, stepping closer to the captain, he insisted that he needed to meet with the true leader directly. The captain warned him not to try anything, but Keel calmly told him that if he did, he would regret it. Some of the men grew uneasy, questioning if it was really all right to let him meet her. The captain reminded them that the employer had already given her consent. One protested again, saying that even as mercenaries they should stop him, but Keel dismissed the idea, telling them not to be ridiculous. Inside the carriage, the princess's attendant grew alarmed, questioning her decision. She told him to remain calm. Then a voice was heard asking permission to come inside. The attendant froze, startled, but the princess answered, granting him permission to enter. The princess's attendant stood stiffly, his expression filled with hostility. Keel, however, crossed his arms calmly and stood before the princess, telling her to remain at ease, assuring her that he had no intention of harming her. The attendant, unconvinced, thought bitterly to himself that the barbarian was surely lying. The princess, however, could only stare at him in awe, realizing that a barbarian from legend was standing directly before her. She gathered herself and, with hesitation, introduced herself politely. Keel returned the courtesy, replying that the pleasure was his. His gaze wandered around the carriage interior, noting how surprisingly warm it was for a space surrounded by snowy plains. Maintaining such warmth in these conditions must have been difficult, he observed aloud. The princess explained quickly that the warmth was sustained by magic. Keel asked with curiosity if it truly was magic, and then shifted the conversation to the greater matter. He told her plainly that this land was dangerous, and the chances of surviving with just her mercenaries were slim. For that reason, he offered his protection. Both the princess and her attendant were shaken when he added that his help came with one condition. When asked what he desired, Keel told her it was not riches or power, but knowledge of the world outside the snowfields. That was the information he wanted. The princess repeated his request in thought, and Keel, smiling, assured her that it was not a bad deal for her. She wondered silently if she even had a choice in the matter, but eventually gave her answer, agreeing to his condition. Satisfied, Keel asked her name. She introduced herself as Milina of House Akasha. He responded in kind, introducing himself as Keel, and with a warm smile, said he looked forward to working with her. Keel then began to share his story. He explained that he had always longed for a fantasy world, and one day he had awakened to find himself reborn as a barbarian in a snowfield. There had been no time to wonder why. All that existed there was an unforgiving cold and powerful, endless monsters. To survive, he had led a tribe, hunting and struggling desperately just to endure. Time became meaningless, as countless years slipped by while he tried relentlessly to escape that desolate land. But every attempt ended the same. A strange force bound him there, his only hope tied to quests that appeared before him. The incomplete quest mocked him with its condition. He would only be able to leave the snowfield upon completion. Yet, no matter what he achieved, he was unable to break free. Just when despair nearly consumed him, outsiders began to appear. Though he couldn't understand why anyone would willingly step into such a godforsaken place, their presence gave him a revelation. Beyond this frozen prison lay the world he had dreamed of, a true world of fantasy and magic. From that moment, his struggle became more than survival. He began to act with purpose. He recalled one of his trials, Quest 295, which tasked him with hunting a lizard within a given time. He crushed monsters, overcame challenges, and completed quest after quest, his determination fixed on the single goal of leaving the snowfield. Each success brought a new task, Quest 295 complete, followed by another and another. With single-minded resolve, he pressed forward, clinging to the hope of one day breaking free from that endless winter. Keel's voice grew louder as he finished recounting his past. He declared that as long as he remained trapped in the snowfield, the knowledge he could obtain from outsiders was invaluable. Yet most of the humans he had encountered either panicked and drew their blades or descended into madness. His tone softened, tinged with rare sorrow, as he admitted to himself that this time was different. For once, he had found someone he could reason with. Surrounded only by ignorant barbarians for countless years, the chance to converse with a civilized person felt almost like healing to his mind. Turning the conversation, Keel noted that it seemed Milina's party was transporting weapons. Surprised, she asked how he had known. He explained simply that he could hear the sharp clang of steel from the wagons, an unmistakable sound. She acknowledged this with unease. Keel then asked if a war was being waged in the outside world. Milina confirmed that the Empire and the Kingdom were currently at war. Keel observed that the outside world was no more peaceful than his frozen prison. Milina agreed, her tone heavy, explaining that though the Empire possessed overwhelming numbers and resources, the Kingdom was not easily defeated. The reason, she continued, was the presence of the swordmaster and the hero who defended the border. This caught Keel's attention immediately. Shocked, he asked what kind of powers a hero or swordmaster wielded. Milina looked at him in surprise and asked if he was unfamiliar with the concept of mysteries. Keel admitted that he had never set foot outside the snowfield. Milina began to explain. Mysteries, she said, were a rare power in the world, sensed and wielded by only a small number of people. Those who could perceive it were ranked by strength. At the lowest were the third rate, who could merely sense the power. Above them were the second rate, who could actively use it. Higher still were the first rate, those who could manifest mystery as mana or aura. Typically knights, mages, and spirit summoners fell into this category. But beyond the first rate were beings so exceptional that ranking became meaningless. These were the transcendents, who dominated and freely wielded mystery, capable of feats such as splitting the heavens and the earth. The swordmaster, she revealed, belonged to this rank. Beyond even them were the heroes, beings so powerful they could influence the world itself. A hero was not merely strong. Their very existence was considered legendary. Milina reflected aloud that even having one's strength quantified within this system was itself proof of great power. A mere third rate, she noted, could dominate within a small domain. Keel listened in silence before suddenly declaring that he wanted to meet such figures. Milina was startled, repeating his name with disbelief. Keel's thoughts turned inward once more. He could not even remember how long he had been trapped in the snowfield. For ages, he had lived only in desperation, fighting to survive. All he knew for certain was that this was a snowfield within a fantasy world, a world he could not escape. A system message echoed cruelly in his mind. Cannot delete scheduled ally. The outside world. The fantasy he had long dreamed of. Keel clenched his resolve. He truly wished to escape the snowfield. Now he's so happy at that moment, and he is smiling with think in his mind now. I must get out. A monster suddenly appeared in front of the team members, and the captain immediately recognized the danger, shouting for his men to prepare. On the other side, Milina froze in shock before quickly identifying it as a black slime. Keel, hearing the name for the first time, thought to himself with mild curiosity, so that's what it was called. Milina, noticing his reaction, explained that the creature was well documented in records. She told him that many powerful warriors had once tried to conquer the white snowfield, and while few survived, those who returned alive had written books about the monsters they encountered. Among them, the black slime was the most frequently mentioned. Turning to Keel, Milina asked if he also knew about it. Keel simply replied with a smile that he did, adding that they were chewy, edible, and made for a decent snack. Milina was stunned at the thought of eating such a creature, and when she questioned him in disbelief, Keel teased her, suggesting that if she wanted to try one, she should catch it herself. Flustered, Milina quickly refused. Suddenly, she cried out in alarm as the fight escalated, and the others echoed her, calling for Keel. But he remained calm, reminding her that he had already made a contract to protect their lives. He clarified that he wouldn't move unless there was true danger and explained that, for now, he wanted to observe how capable the outside world warriors really were. Meanwhile, the captain barked an order for shields to be raised. His men obeyed instantly, bracing themselves as they engaged the monster. The clash filled the snowy air with sounds of struggle, grunts, shouts of pain, and cries as they fought desperately against the black slime. In the midst of battle, one of the team members cried out in frustration, overwhelmed by the monster's movements. The captain quickly reminded everyone that black slimes only moved in straight lines and ordered them to scatter and coordinate their attacks. The soldiers responded at once and adjusted their formation, continuing the fight with renewed focus. The captain urged them on, telling them not to stop and explaining that ordinary attacks would do nothing. They needed to strike at the hidden core inside the creature. The team acknowledged the command with determination, focusing their efforts until finally, the monster collapsed. Shouts of victory erupted from the group as they cheered, relieved and smiling at their success. Milina's eyes sparkled with joy as she celebrated with them, overjoyed that they had actually won. But the moment of relief was short-lived. Another monster suddenly emerged before them, causing the group to panic and cry out in alarm. A soldier shouted for them to aim for the neck, and they quickly engaged the new threat. During the clash, one of the men muttered that the white snowfield wasn't nearly as terrifying as the rumors claimed. The captain, however, remained cautious, wondering if the rumors had perhaps been exaggerated. He warned them not to lower their guard, reminding them they weren't even halfway through their journey yet. Meanwhile, some of the soldiers began casting doubtful glances at Keel. One whispered that perhaps the barbarian wasn't as strong as the legend suggested, that he might just be feeding off their efforts. The captain considered the thought, wondering if they should at least test Keel's strength to know for sure. Soon after, the group approached Milina, voicing their thoughts to her. They told her directly that they had something important to discuss regarding Keel. Confused, Milina asked them what they meant by test. The mercenaries pressed Milina, insisting that they were the ones risking their lives to complete the mission. They reminded her that they were bound to her by contract, and that their demand was only natural. Milina acknowledged their point with gratitude, telling them that she was always thankful they had accepted the dangerous task. In her thoughts, however, she reflected on the truth. Crossing the white snowfield was such a daunting request that every other group had fled upon hearing the details. Without these mercenaries, she wouldn't even have been able to attempt the journey. Still, there was one thing she couldn't accept. When they pointed out that the barbarian had not lifted a finger in battle, she hesitated, unable to easily respond. One of them pressed further, asking if they could test whether Keel truly deserved such special treatment. The word test weighed heavily on her mind, and she wondered what exactly they intended. The captain stepped in, explaining that he had tried to stop them, but they refused to listen. At that moment, Keel emerged from the carriage, calmly addressing the group. If they wanted to test his skills, he said he had no objection, but now was not the time. His words left the mercenaries momentarily stunned. He explained further that he would not fight them at this moment, because they already had guests approaching. The mercenaries frowned, confused by what he meant, but before they could protest further, an ominous presence made itself known. A monster had appeared, silently observing them. In its mind, it sneered at the sight of the frail mortals before it, delighting in the rare delicacy they represented. One of the mercenaries cried out in horror, as the creature's thoughts echoed with malice. To the monster, their struggle would be nothing more than seasoning for its feast. The people screamed in terror as the monstrous presence loomed over them. Keel stepped forward, facing the creature directly, and commanded it to stop. He declared that the people behind him were his guests, then ordered the monster to leave. The serpent-like monster recoiled at his words and questioned why Keel was there, accusing him of breaking the laws of the snowfields by leaving his tribe's territory. Keel, unmoved, retorted that it was none of the serpent's concern. The monster roared back in fury, declaring itself the snake, one who had been promised immortality. It refused to accept commands from a barbarian. In response, Keel readied himself for battle, saying that such a creature needed to be taught a lesson, as it was the type that only listened after a beating. The fight erupted violently. Snow blasted into the air with every strike, the ground itself trembling under their clash. Milina, shaken, stepped closer and called out to Keel. He answered calmly, telling her he would finish the fight quickly and join her soon. After some time, everyone was left in shock at the protagonist's fighting skills. They all gathered in front of him, admitting that they had committed a sin worthy of death and begged for their lives to be spared. The protagonist, looking slightly confused, responded that it was only natural not to trust a stranger so easily, and that he understood their actions. Milina's assistant, however, remained cold and suddenly let out a pained scream. The protagonist then turned his attention to Milina, stating that there was something he was curious about. Milina quickly reacted to his words, asking what he meant. While the others were still tense, Keel turned to Milina. With curiosity in his voice, he asked about her true identity, noting from her attire and speech that she didn't seem like a mere agent of her family. Why, then, would she personally embark on such a life-threatening trade journey? Milina hesitated, but then explained. She revealed that she was the first daughter of Lady Beliaka, the concubine of Lord Kazakh, Akasha. When Keel asked if she meant a second wife, Milina confirmed it. Her mother had been married off for political reasons, only to be abandoned afterward, stripped of any real power. Milina's voice hardened as she admitted that she and her mother were family only in name. In reality, they were treated as nothing more than servants. Realizing how much she had confessed, she faltered, but then revealed the truth. She had volunteered for this trade mission herself. Keel asked if she truly had, and Milina affirmed it. Despite the danger of the journey, she had chosen it because someone had to set an example. Keel regarded her quietly and replied that he understood. Keel regarded Milina carefully, telling her that she was intelligent. Surprised, she asked what he meant, but he continued, saying she also carried great ambition, calling her a greedy one. Milina faltered at his words, left momentarily speechless. Before she could respond further, the captain interrupted with a loud announcement that they had arrived. The group erupted in excitement, shouting in relief as they saw grass before them. Together, they turned to Keel and thanked him respectfully. Keel then asked Milina how she intended to manage the return trip. She explained that by then, she could simply pass through the Empire. Keel acknowledged her reasoning, noting that once she had sold the weapons and was empty-handed, crossing the border would not be too difficult. Milina then returned to something he had said earlier. She reminded him that he had called her intelligent and ambitious, and asked what exactly he meant by that. Keel replied plainly that he meant it as he said. She was intelligent and also ambitious. Those words struck her, and he pressed further. He explained that her family had once been highly renowned, but was now on the brink of collapse due to a lack of funds. Even as the daughter of a concubine, if she took bold action to carve out a path for survival while her family faltered, people would naturally choose to trust and follow her. He asked if her true goal was to seize control of her family. Milina reflected on his words, then admitted quietly that his answer was perfect, though she tried to deny it. Keel, in turn, thought to himself that he had been right all along. A child of a concubine challenging fate in order to inherit the family name was nothing new. It was a tale as old as time. Meanwhile, Milina studied him. She realized that this barbarian was no fool. He was far sharper than those who merely thought themselves clever. And the power he had shown, defeating the white snake without a single scratch, was undeniable. The thought crossed her mind. If she could command such strength for herself, her ambitions could be within reach. With that in mind, she asked Keel directly if he ever considered leaving the snowfields. If so, would he join her? Keel declined immediately, explaining that he still had matters to resolve there. Milina accepted his answer, masking her disappointment as she simply replied that she understood. Milina removed the necklace from around her neck and handed it to Keel. She told him that if he ever came to the outside world and sought the Akasha family, he should show them this piece as proof. Keel accepted the gift with a rare, genuine smile. He said that if it was a gift, he would gladly accept it. Milina's assistant quickly expressed her gratitude, thanking Keel sincerely. In response, Keel told them that someday he hoped they would meet again. With that, Milina and her people departed for the capital, while Keel quietly watched them leave, his gaze lingering with unspoken emotion. 5 years passed. In the endless white snowfields, Keel stood alone. At last, he felt a change and muttered to himself that all conditions had finally been met. Before him, a familiar interface appeared. His 784th quest had been completed, the reward distributed, and the final condition fulfilled. The system announced that he was now permitted to leave the snowfields. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, realizing he was finally free. For the first time, he could take a step into the fantasy world he had long dreamed of. As he emerged beyond the snow, his senses were overwhelmed. The fragrance of grass, the smell of beasts, and the fresh scent of a river, scents he had never once encountered in the frozen plains, surrounded him. He smiled, savoring it. It was new. It was real. Turning back toward the snowfields, he shouted with raw relief, swearing never to return. This was a fantasy world, the very world he had dreamed of even in his sleep. A realm of illusions, mysteries, wonders, magic, and races like dragons and elves. Though his beginning in this world had gone terribly wrong, he had endured, and now he had survived. He reflected on it soberly. The snowfields were a hell that could not be endured by will alone. Without his longing for this world, he would never have made it. Continuing onward, his eyes fell on a sight in the distance, a cluster of buildings. A village. His heart stirred as he realized he had finally reached a civilized place in this world. Memories flickered of the barbarians he once lived among, who dug into the snow to sleep and stared blankly whenever he tried to explain the need for shelter. They had been incapable of understanding him. This village, though, promised order, structure, and humanity. As he walked closer, he wondered how he should greet its people. Should he begin simply with a hello? Or perhaps, more traditionally, ask them, "What world is this?" Either way, he resolved to be polite and carry himself as a gentleman. The elf elder gathered everyone in the village and declared that from that day forward, this would be their new home. He instructed the villagers to unpack their belongings and settle in. One of the younger elves hesitated, addressing the elder with concern. The elder asked what was troubling him, and the youth admitted his worry. Was this place truly safe? The elder gave a firm answer. It was. Nearby, some elves began whispering among themselves about humans. They reassured each other that this was an extremely remote location where humans could never come. Still, they worried aloud about the snowy plains lying so close to them. The elder understood their fears. The young elf quickly pressed the concern that the plains were far too near and the threat of monsters was real. Growing stern, the elder silenced the doubts. For thousands of years, nothing had ever come out of the snowy plains. On top of that, they had already set up a powerful barrier. The elder reflected to himself. The barrier not only concealed their presence, but made their settlement appear like an ordinary forest. It had taken months of design and ancient elven magic to construct. As long as it remained intact, no outsider could approach them. And even if monsters did emerge from the snowy plains, there was no reason to fear, for they had Her Majesty, the Queen. No matter how terrible the monsters, none would ever reach her. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Keel suddenly felt something unusual. It was as though something had been torn. He wondered if he had triggered something but decided to keep walking, questioning how far he still had to travel. Then, unexpectedly, he froze in excitement. Before him stood an elf, an actual elf. One of the most iconic races of any fantasy world. He could hardly believe his luck in encountering one so soon. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely glad to be alive. Not far away, a small elf child had wandered off and was growing frightened. She didn't know where she was or how to return, and panic began to overtake her. Keel approached, deciding to greet her gently. Yet the moment he said hello, the child screamed in terror and collapsed, fainting on the spot. Puzzled, Keel studied the situation. He hadn't even managed to hold a proper conversation before she lost consciousness. Now, he reasoned, perhaps the best course would be to take her back to the village. His thoughts turned to what he knew of Elven culture. In many stories, elves were a gentle race aligned with order and goodness. If he returned a fainted child safely, perhaps they would welcome him as a kind and trustworthy person. The very idea of being warmly received by elves stirred his anticipation. He smiled at the thought, already looking forward to it. But before he could act further, the child's mother appeared. Her voice rang out in horror at the sight before her daughter lying unconscious in front of a human. Shock and fear filled her cry as she rushed forward. The elves all shouted at Keel in unison, demanding to know what he was and how he had managed to break through their protective barrier. The child's mother, shocked by the scene before her, realized this was nothing like what she had expected. Panic overwhelmed her as she screamed for her child. At that moment, the elder elf arrived. His thoughts raced in disbelief. This was supposed to be a remote, untouched land where no human should have been able to appear. Out loud, he questioned how a human could possibly be here, especially when there was supposed to be a barrier in place. Another elf rushed in with urgent news. There was a crack in the barrier. The elder immediately demanded to know where their queen was. The others explained that Her Majesty was currently away, only on a brief patrol of the area. Trying to calm the situation, Keel stepped forward, insisting he was not their enemy. But the elves shouted back at him, warning that if he did not release the child, they would hunt him down and kill him. The elder, still unsettled, thought to himself that his location had been exposed. The barrier was created using ancient elven magic, something no trick or simple force should have been able to break. For it to be damaged meant only one thing. Humans must have come fully prepared. The elder wondered how long they had been tracking him. Meanwhile, Keel considered the situation himself. He wondered if he really looked like a kidnapper. The most important thing, he decided, was to clear up this misunderstanding. He turned to the young elf child and told her to go back to her people. The girl hesitated, staring at his face with fear. Keel was left to wonder if his appearance was really that frightening. Back in the snowy plains, he had thought he looked decent enough. Regardless, he had returned the child. He tried once more to explain to the elves, insisting that he was not their enemy. But the elder ignored his words. Raising his voice, he declared that the hostage had been released and gave the order to attack. The elves obeyed, unleashing their magic and weapons with a cry to fire. Keel, now under assault, could only question to himself in frustration whether they truly could not hear him. The protagonist reflected on what he had seen of the elves and their behavior. Contrary to the legends that described them as gentle people who loved nature and pursued peace, the reality was different. These elves were violent, wild, and far more savage than he had imagined. Then again, they were a race living deep in the wilderness, and nature itself was not peaceful, but a place where only the strong survived. In that sense, their ferocity was only natural. With this realization, he quietly muttered to himself in thought. Just then, a group of elves launched another attack against him, convinced that some powerful artifact was protecting him and that it must have a limit if they kept pressing forward. The protagonist tried to steady himself, attempting to suppress his strength, but the energy flared regardless. The elves panicked and rushed to deploy a barrier. The elder elf froze in shock, unable to comprehend what he was witnessing. In that moment, the protagonist spoke to them, declaring once again that he was not their enemy. Internally, he realized he might have failed to properly control his strength, but tried to correct himself and began addressing the elves again. Before he could continue, however, another attack suddenly came his way. The elves immediately shouted in alarm, announcing the arrival of their queen, Marzelia Hajan, the hero of Apai and ruler of the Leaf clan. The queen demanded to know what was happening, and the elder hastily explained that a human had attacked them. She acknowledged the report coldly, concluding that this place was not as safe as they had hoped. The protagonist tried to intervene, asking them to listen to what he had to say. The elder, however, was in disbelief, shocked that he could remain unharmed even after taking a direct strike from their queen. Marzelia herself regarded him with disdain, interpreting his strength as yet another sign that a human powerhouse had come to target them. Inwardly, She thought to herself how disgusting humans were. She then introduced herself formally as the Queen of the Leaf Clan, her voice ringing with authority. Turning her gaze on the protagonist, she declared that he was human and that he would pay the price for his greed. The protagonist, meanwhile, could not understand why she seemed unable or unwilling to listen to him. They were clearly speaking the same language, yet she refused to acknowledge his words. Perhaps relations between humans and elves were so strained that nothing he said mattered. Either way, he recalled a lesson he had learned long ago in the tundra. Sometimes, people only listened after you landed a hit. After the Queen Elf launched her attack on Keel, he immediately countered. With a grin, he let out a playful whoops, as if he hadn't meant to go so far. The force of his strike sent the Queen stumbling back until she sat on the ground. Keel frowned to himself, wondering if he should have held back even more. The Queen, however, was shaken. From that single clash, she could already tell, his strength far surpassed that of an ordinary fighter, reaching a level even greater than a transcendent. She couldn't understand why someone that powerful would be here. Realizing the danger, she ordered her people to retreat. Her voice was firm as she commanded them to get away immediately. Though the elves hesitated in shock, they obeyed when she repeated her order more urgently. Once the others had withdrawn, the Queen turned back to Keel. She admitted his strength, but declared that no matter how powerful he was, he would never achieve his purpose here. Keel, still smiling lightly, tried to explain that he had only wanted to talk, but even he could feel that things had gone completely sideways. The Queen ignored his words and began summoning. She invoked ancient incantations, calling upon a primeval force of purity and flame. A massive creature appeared, a bull with blazing horns of fire. Keel's eyes lit up in awe. Unlike the grotesque and twisted creatures of the tundra, this being looked exactly like the kind of majestic spirit one would expect in a fantasy world. To him, it was beautiful. The Queen gave the order for the spirit, Pigo, the highest grade fire spirit, to annihilate her opponent. The spirit, however, scoffed at the idea, grumbling that contracts were troublesome. The Queen silenced him sharply. Inwardly, she knew the truth. Pigo was a being of pure flame, ancient and proud. Her own power alone was not enough to summon him, and she had only managed to form this contract with the assistance of another tribe. Never had she imagined she would call upon him under such dire circumstances. Reasserting her authority, she commanded him to fulfill their contract. Pigo glanced at Keel, unimpressed at first, until his eyes narrowed. Something about Keel unsettled him. This was no ordinary human. In fact, he wasn't even sure Keel was human at all. Suddenly, a beast appeared before them. Keel's eyes lit up with something like joy, as though he had just witnessed a blessing. To him, the sight was unbelievable, a summoned beast, something that felt like true fantasy. The beast, however, saw Keel and his group as intruders. It declared humans unworthy of coveting the races of nature and swore to reduce them to ash, leaving nothing behind. With that, it charged directly at Keel. Keel, unfazed, stopped the beast's attack with just one hand. He remarked that its beastly form actually reassured him, since it made it easier for him to crush it without hesitation. The Queen Elf, watching nearby, screamed in terror as Keel swiftly killed the beast. She collapsed to the ground, stunned, unable to believe what she had just witnessed. To her, it didn't seem real. Shaking, she begged Keel to spare her kin. Keel responded gently, telling her that he was not her enemy. His words shocked her. She could hardly believe them. But after a long conversation, she and her people eventually came to accept that he truly meant no harm. The Queen apologized, admitting that they had judged him too quickly. She reflected with guilt that they had mistaken the man who returned their child for an enemy, and in doing so, had committed a grave insult. Keel reassured her. He explained that he understood their caution, since they had been driven here by humans. Still, he admitted it was a little sad that they never gave him a chance to explain himself first. The Queen, still uncertain, asked him directly if he really wasn't one of the humans chasing them. Keel told her this was his first time ever seeing an elf, and that there were none in the White Wasteland where he came from. The Queen Elf trembled as she repeated Keel's words. The White Wasteland, the name alone shook her. She recognized him as the ashen barbarian of the wasteland, a figure spoken of in fear and disbelief. Keel confirmed that this was indeed what outsiders called him. The queen found it nearly impossible to accept. She could not believe that any human, let alone him, had survived such a place. Hesitantly, she asked if his escape meant others might also emerge from there. Keel doubted it. He explained that the wasteland was bound by strict rules that even powerful beings could not break. Somehow, through the form of a hidden quest, he alone had bypassed them. But that was an extraordinary exception. Relieved, the queen then asked after his summoned beast. Keel casually replied that he had split it in half. She reassured him that there was no need to worry, as spirits simply returned to the spirit realm when forcibly unsummoned. Realizing she had been rather rude earlier, she offered to do something in return for him. Curious, Keel asked whether beings other than elves could contract with spirits. The queen admitted it was unlikely, though occasionally humans with a deep affinity to nature had managed it. Still, if he truly wished to pursue such a contract, she advised him to travel to Elfo Sagrado, the holy land where the god of elves resided. Keel wondered if a human like him would even be allowed entry. She told him that under normal circumstances, no, but with her introduction, it would be possible. She stressed the importance of secrecy, since no elf would ever risk revealing the location of such a sacred place. Despite this, she chose to trust him, and handed him a crystal as proof of her belief. Keel accepted it gratefully. She warned him that even if he reached the Holy Land, their god might still test him, though she believed he would pass. After offering her well wishes, she formally introduced herself as Marcella Hajian Karuja, queen of the leaf tribe that turned brown in autumn. When asked his name, Keel gave it simply, Keel the Barbarian. Not long after, Keel set out again, running toward another country. At the border of Varkan territory in the kingdom of Gehent, chaos broke out among the guards. Something was rapidly approaching. Alarms rang, bells sounded, and orders for every guard to arm themselves were shouted. When Keel finally arrived at the gate, one of the guards, startled and almost shouting, recognized him immediately. Keel approached with a calm smile and casually asked the group of guards if they were indeed the ones stationed there. Without hesitation, he greeted them politely. The guards, however, were unsettled. The sound of the earlier clash still rang in their minds, and they quickly began connecting details. The ash-gray hair, the scar across his chest. Their eyes widened in disbelief as they whispered among themselves. Could this man really be the Ashen Barbarian? Startled, the guards quickly raised their weapons and shouted at him not to come any closer, warning they would attack if he did. Keel, unfazed, simply told them to calm down. He assured them again that he was not their enemy. One of the guards, still cautious, asked him directly what he was seeking from them. In response, Keel raised his finger and pointed toward the great wall behind them. When questioned, he explained clearly that he wished to visit their territory. The guards pressed further, asking if he only intended to pass through. Keel clarified that if possible, he would like to remain there for some time, though he could not say for how long. Still suspicious, the guards demanded his name. Keel answered honestly his name was Keel. They then asked if he had anyone to vouch for him, or any form of identification. Keel admitted he had neither. At that moment, he remembered Milina's words from before. She had thanked him and entrusted him with a small crest, telling him that if he ever went outside and visited House Akasha, he should show them that peace. Recalling this, Keel presented the crest to the guards and asked if it would be enough to verify his identity. The guards examined it closely, asking what it was. Keel explained that it was the crest of House Akasha, which he had received directly from someone of that bloodline. Recognition flickered in their eyes. House Akasha? Yes, the merchant family from the Dena'in Kingdom. One guard recalled that they had ventured into the White Wastelands several years ago. Another added that the house had risen rapidly in prominence after a new head took over not long ago. Keel then asked plainly if the crest could serve as his proof of identity. The guards hesitated that it did not appear to be a forgery, but confirming its validity was difficult since it was not from their kingdom. This land, after all, was under the kingdom of Gehentra. After a brief discussion, they returned the crest to him. Though it could not fully confirm his identity, it was still helpful. Finally, they allowed him entry, but with a condition. When Keel asked what that condition was, the guards explained they required confirmation that he posed no threat. Keel tilted his head slightly and muttered with a faint grin. It seemed they wanted a party. The guards explained the condition. At that very moment, 3 others were also seeking entry into the territory. The requirement was simple. Keel would need to form a party with those individuals, whose identities were equally uncertain, and clear a dungeon near the domain. Keel thought it over briefly. A dungeon raid, as a condition? It seemed easier than he expected. He accepted without hesitation, though the guards added one more requirement. After clearing the dungeon, he would need to report everything that had occurred inside. Keel quickly understood. Those with unclear status were being forced to watch each other, and in the process, any suspicious individuals would naturally be revealed. He even admitted the method was clever. The guards, however, clarified that it wasn't quite so simple. Then, with some hesitation, they asked if Keel truly was a barbarian. Keel confirmed it plainly. He was indeed a barbarian. The guards were taken aback. They had always thought barbarians to be nothing more than a race of brutes, yet Keel was unlike any they had ever met. After regaining composure, they decided to end the discussion and move things along. Elsewhere, the 3 other candidates were already present. Tension hung in the air. One of them, an older man in worn armor, scoffed bitterly about the law forcing him into a dungeon alongside rats who pick pockets. His name was Alessandro Tyrannus, a self-proclaimed paladin. Another, a sharp-tongued man with a mischievous grin, immediately mocked him. He reminded the so-called paladin of how a thief had once scammed him and stolen his fortune. This was Cain, a thief by trade, and he took great pleasure in taunting the armored man. The insults flew rapidly. The thief ridiculed Alessandro's title, claiming no real paladin would even be found in a place like this. He called him nothing more than a wandering warrior pretending to be something greater. He even mocked his surname, drawing an enraged response from the older man, who nearly leapt at him. Before things could escalate further, a young cleric stepped between them. Hayes, a cleric of Kolosia, sighed and tried to calm them down, though her expression betrayed her frustration. She thought to herself how unfortunate it was to be grouped with the likes of them and wondered if such a party could possibly survive a dungeon. Someone reminded the group that dungeon entry required at least 4 members. One more should soon arrive. A guard entered, announcing the final participant. Cain smirked, hoping this last edition would at least be sane. The door opened, and Keel stepped inside. His imposing presence filled the room at once. The others froze, stunned by his size and the overwhelming aura he carried. They whispered among themselves, uncertain if he was even human. Keel greeted them with calm politeness and asked if they were to be his party members. Introducing himself as a barbarian named Keel, he invited the others to do the same. Cain was the first to respond, nervously admitting he was a thief. Alessandro followed with a proud declaration of his name and role as a paladin. This immediately prompted a question about his abilities, whether he could use holy power. The man hesitated, then admitted that, while normally paladins could, he was a special case and had no access to it. Keel was momentarily taken aback when Alessandro admitted he couldn't use holy power despite calling himself a paladin. Before he could say more, the young cleric stepped forward and introduced herself. She revealed that she served Kolosia, the god of lies and deceit. Because of this, her faith and role as a cleric were often doubted. Keel acknowledged her words simply and noted how unusual her situation was. The guards soon interrupted, announcing that everything was prepared. The group followed them until they reached their destination. In front of them stood the entrance to a dungeon. The guards explained that it was a 3-floor dungeon filled with undead, and the task was simple: clear it and return with proof. Cain, the thief, immediately took the lead in organizing the party. He asked Keel for his thoughts, but quickly realized he didn't need to address him so formally. Keel dismissed the sir, reminding him they were a team. Laughing awkwardly, Cain laid out the plan. Keel and Alessandro would take the front lines, he would handle traps, and Hayes would provide support from the rear. Keel agreed, and the group stepped inside. The dungeon interior was shrouded in darkness. Hayes muttered a quiet prayer, unnerved by how strangely quiet and normal everything felt. The lack of visible traps or tricks made her uneasy. Then Cain stopped, his eyes narrowing. He spotted fragments scattered across the ground, broken bones. He warned the others that these were skeletons lying dormant, waiting to rise if they drew near. Keel peered ahead, but admitted he saw nothing unusual. Cain, however, knew better. His thoughts turned grim. From the start, the guard captain must have known this wasn't simply a test of identity. This dungeon was a convenient way to dispose of troublesome outsiders. He quickly explained the danger. Skeletons were not weak creatures. They fought relentlessly, continuing to move even when maimed, their bones giving them high defense. Their only true weakness was the neck, but even then, it often required multiple precise strikes. Cain gave out orders with urgency. Hayes was told to prepare her powers, Alessandro to ready his shield, and Keel to stand by. He promised to look for openings during the fight, while warning them again to aim for the neck. Keel nodded calmly. "Got it," he said, stepping forward without hesitation. The skeletons stirred. One rose from the scattered remains, rattling as it came to life. Hayes clasped her hands nervously, whispering another prayer, while the others readied themselves for a drawn-out battle. But Keel didn't wait. He moved in swiftly, meeting the skeleton head-on. With a single powerful strike, he shattered it instantly, crushing bone into fragments. The creature collapsed, lifeless. The group froze in stunned silence. Keel glanced down at the remains, smiling faintly. "Just like you said, Cain," he remarked. "Take the head, and it really does stop moving." Cain laughed to himself, realizing Keel had misunderstood earlier. He thought, "That's not what I meant." He then explained to the group that skeletons were not simple creatures. Their bones were extremely hard and unnatural, making them difficult to cut. Even a skilled swordsman would struggle to slice through in a single strike without using aura. On top of that, the skeleton they faced had been strengthened by the dungeon's mana. The proper way to defeat one was to repeatedly strike its neck, wearing down the vertebrae like chopping at the trunk of a tree. To completely pulverize a skull in one blow, however, was practically impossible. Cain thought to himself, shocked at what he had witnessed. "I knew he was strong from the start, but I never imagined this much. Is he even human?" Meanwhile, Keel calmly told the group it was time to continue. The others scrambled nervously to follow, answering hastily. Keel reminded them there was no need to rush, which only made them stumble over their words even more. Both the paladin and Hayes muttered anxiously that they didn't want to die. Just as fear overtook the group, Hayes suddenly spotted movement and shouted that more skeletons were coming. Cain confirmed her fears. This time, they were advancing. Keel looked at his team and made a request. The others were surprised when he asked if he could take on the skeletons alone. He explained there was something he wanted to test. Both the paladin and Hayes immediately agreed, though nervously, and Keel thanked them. As the skeletons approached, the others wondered aloud what Keel was planning. He, meanwhile, studied the creatures with curiosity, wondering how they were constructed. When one swung at him, Keel blocked with only 2 fingers, snapping its sword effortlessly. He taunted the skeleton, asking what it could do now. The monster tried again, so Keel seized its arm and snapped it apart, asking if that was any better. When it switched its weapon to the other hand, Keel mocked its adaptability before breaking the second arm as well. He observed aloud that the skeleton seemed capable of substituting its parts, showing a surprising degree of intelligence. Hayes could barely watch, while Cain stared in shock. The group whispered among themselves, calling Keel a true barbarian. The fight ended brutally when Keel crushed the skeleton's skull under his leg. He noted with amusement that the creature could even continue moving with only its head. After finishing, he apologized to the group for the delay. The paladin immediately insisted there was no need to apologize and that Keel should take all the time he needed. Confused but polite, Keel thanked him, then signaled for the party to move forward again. They descended to the second floor. The paladin nervously suggested they should take a short rest. Keel considered it and agreed, which prompted an overly relieved response from the paladin. During the pause, Keel brought up a question he had about the dungeon. Embarrassed, he admitted that his knowledge was insufficient. Hayes quickly reassured him, saying that a desire to learn was admirable, and encouraged him to ask. Keel's question was simple. Since this dungeon was located so close to the territory, wasn't it dangerous for the monsters within to be left unchecked? Hayes explained that, generally, dungeon monsters did not leave their grounds, though exceptions sometimes occurred. When that happened, they were identified and dealt with before they could cause damage. The paladin added in a serious tone that dungeons themselves were natural phenomena. Sometimes they appeared as caves, and at other times as towers. The paladin continued explaining. Most dungeons, he said, tended to manifest near densely populated areas. Keel nodded at this. So that is why it appeared here, he remarked. The paladin went on, explaining that whenever a dungeon manifested, the local lord would evaluate its danger level. Afterward, outsiders such as mercenaries or guards were dispatched to clear it. Keel listened carefully, then asked if dungeons ever manifested directly inside territories. Hayes shook her head and clarified that they always appeared at a certain distance away. I see, Keel replied. Then, turning to the group, he asked whether there was a reward for fully conquering one. Hayes confirmed, explaining that usually a boss awaited on the final floor. Defeating it granted various rewards, and for a dungeon of this size, the rewards would likely be quite substantial. Keel muttered to himself, almost amused, just like a game. Hayes caught the words and asked what he meant. Keel dismissed it, saying he was only talking to himself. He then said he had one more question. Hayes encouraged him to ask, so Keel posed it plainly. Who created these dungeons? Hayes was taken aback and explained that dungeons were thought to occur naturally. No one made them. Still, she admitted there were many oddities. They always seemed to appear near settlements, tempting people with treasure, as if deliberately placed to draw explorers in. Keel reflected aloud, noting that for something claimed to be a natural phenomenon, it felt far too deliberate. Hayes was struck by his words, realizing she had never once questioned the truth of it. To her, it had always been a simple fact of the world. Is this barbarian questioning the very order of things? She thought. Barbarians were known as ignorant, savage beings, incapable of higher thought. Yet this one didn't feel like the others. The paladin broke the silence with a short remark. How interesting. Keel then turned to the group, asking if they had rested enough. Cain acknowledged, and the paladin quickly confirmed as well. With that, Keel declared it was time to depart once more. The paladin, still shaken, answered firmly. Deeper inside, the group stumbled upon something unexpected, a treasure chest. The paladin pointed it out, explaining that it was one of the dungeon's rewards. He told Keel he could have it, provided he could unlock it. Still, he thought privately that opening a chest of this quality would normally require a master rogue with proven lockpicking skills, someone far above their current situation. Without such a person, the chest was useless, and he assumed they would have to abandon it. But Keel surprised him, turning to Cain and asking him to unlock it. The paladin was stunned. That was a treasure chest, after all. Keel calmly reminded him that Cain was a rogue, and wasn't it the rogue's responsibility to handle such things? The paladin frowned. Keel wasn't wrong, but there was a serious problem. If Cain had those kind of skills, he wouldn't be here struggling with them in the first place. Still, the look of expectation on Keel's face made it impossible to refuse. If he admitted the truth, Keel's expression would turn instantly to disappointment. He imagined the words in his head. You call yourself a rogue, yet you can't even do that? You're useless. Forcing a laugh, Cain said he would give it a try. From behind, Keel observed with interest. He thought to himself, noting with curiosity the tools used for lockpicking. Meanwhile, Cain could feel Keel's stare burning into his back. If he failed, he thought, he wouldn't be leaving here alive. He urged himself to remember, to recall the skills he had once seen real rogues perform back when he worked as a porter. At last, he steeled himself. I have to risk my life, he declared, preparing to attempt the lock. Cain the rogue, cry of the soul. At that moment, both Cain and Keel were shaken. Cain, his voice trembling and eyes wet, muttered that the chest had opened. On the other side, Hayes burst out in excitement, amazed at what he had just witnessed. He remarked that only highly skilled thieves were said to be capable of unlocking treasure chests, yet Cain had done it right before their eyes. To him, it was nothing short of incredible. Keel, just as surprised, turned to Cain and acknowledged his success, calling it impressive. But inside, Cain couldn't understand how it had even worked. He had always believed it was impossible for him. Unlocking the chest by nothing more than instinct and observation seemed unreal. For someone who had lived his entire life priding himself on doing his best to survive, this was the first time he began questioning what his best really meant. Had he truly been living his life to the fullest until now? Breaking his thoughts, Keel asked about the value of the treasure. Hayes quickly estimated that it was enough for an ordinary family to live comfortably for about a month, more than enough to live luxuriously for that period. Keel acknowledged the answer and instructed Cain to take care of the rewards. Cain, still unsettled, responded firmly with respect. Noticing his unease, Keel looked at him again and asked if he needed help. When Cain hesitated, Keel pressed further, wondering if he was hurt. Flustered, Cain quickly denied it, insisting that nothing was wrong. Before the moment could drag further, Keel suddenly alerted everyone. He had sensed enemies approaching for skeletons. Calmly, he declared that he would handle 3 of them and instructed Cain to take on the last one. Hearing this, Cain froze for a moment. This was no practice, no simple task. This was a real battle. He steadied himself as the weight of it sank in. The paladin responded firmly, signaling his understanding, while Cain muttered how the very sight of skeletons forming, bones clattering together into shape, always sent a chill down his spine. One of the members shouted to alert everyone, and Hayes immediately began a prayer to prepare for combat. The battle began. Cain made the first move, striking at one of the skeletons, while Keel faced 3 on his own. As he fought, Keel remarked that it was a rare sight and told the others not to interrupt. Confidently, he embraced the challenge, declaring that he would handle all 3 himself. Meanwhile, Cain and the paladin worked together against a single skeleton. Hayes unleashed one of her powerful skills, summoning an ability called Shadow of Confusion. With that, the tide turned quickly. Keel finished off the 3 skeletons he had engaged, laughing as he did. He noted that witnessing the core skills of a party in action firsthand was impressive and rare. With the obstacles cleared, he told the group to focus and enjoy the fight ahead. The others, however, were unsettled. They began to realize that Keel seemed to be testing them rather than simply helping. This realization fired them up, and they attacked the remaining skeleton with renewed determination, warning each other not to show any weakness, because weakness meant death. The protagonist reflected silently, realizing that those who had come to the snowfield were indeed strong. Soon after, another skeleton appeared, this one stronger than before, from the 3rd floor of the dungeon. The number of enemies increased, but with Keel leading at the front, the party managed to push forward without much trouble. Finally, they reached the deepest part of the dungeon. There, sitting on a chair, was a fearsome figure, the skeleton knight. Everyone froze in shock, muttering in disbelief, wondering why such a monster was there. Keel calmly asked if the skeleton was different from the others they had faced. He was told that it was indeed much stronger. The group's thoughts turned grim. A skeleton capable of wielding both longsword and shield with such mastery was something only a knight-level fighter could hope to face. Against this foe, they had no chance. It was a monster far beyond what they could handle. Hayes asked what would happen if they failed to clear the dungeon and chose to retreat. The answer was that a report would need to be made to the local territory, and if the retreat was judged to be reasonable, it would likely be accepted without consequence. The party turned to Keel for guidance, calling out his name hesitantly. In response, Keel answered with his usual calm and composed demeanor, stating that retreat under such conditions was reasonable. The skeleton monster rose to its feet, maintaining its form instead of collapsing. Keel noted its unusual stability with interest. The creature launched an attack with its sword, forcing Keel to warn the others to stay back. Hayes cried out in panic, and both she and the paladin collapsed to the ground in fear and shock. Keel reacted instantly, meeting the monster's assault head-on. The paladin, watching from the ground, realized the overwhelming power behind just a single exchange. The strength on display was far beyond what he could imagine. Before the monster could strike again, Keel countered decisively and destroyed it with a single punch. The battle ended almost as quickly as it had begun, leaving the rest of the group shaken by what they had just witnessed. Keel calmly asked if that was all, and Cain nervously confirmed. He then pointed to a locked treasure chest and admitted he had no way of opening it. The lock was too advanced for his skills. Keel acknowledged the difficulty, but without hesitation, broke the chest open with a single blow. Everyone froze in disbelief at what they had seen, while Keel simply remarked that the rewards would be much easier to collect this way. He instructed Cain to handle the distribution, which Cain reluctantly accepted. Inwardly, Cain wondered why Keel had even bothered to ask him to unlock the chest when he could simply smash it open. Once the group exited the dungeon, Keel questioned Cain about the lack of a hidden chamber. Cain explained that if a dungeon was perfectly cleared, it would disappear, and that this one had contained no secret rooms. When Keel learned such places did exist on occasion, he smiled faintly, commenting that it sounded entertaining. Cain was unsettled by how casually he said it. Outside, the guards were surprised to see them emerge so quickly. They asked about the dungeon's state, and Keel replied that it had been very satisfying. Hayes confirmed there had been no major issues. When the guards inquired whether it would be acceptable for Keel, a barbarian, to remain within the territory, Hayes responded that it should be fine. Hayes quietly observed how discussions grew vague whenever Keel became the subject, noting that no one spoke directly about him. The guards, on the other hand, reflected that the entry procedure was not solely about dungeon clearance. It also served as a method to identify and weed out potential threats to the domain. Cain Hark voiced his own judgment, remarking that Keel did not seem the type to cause trouble. The paladin considered the matter more deeply, acknowledging Keel's monstrous strength, but pointing out that he had never turned that strength against his companions. It confirmed what the paladin already suspected. Keel was very different from any barbarian he had heard of before. When the guards questioned Keel, he offered an evaluation of his party instead of boasting about himself. He credited Cain for disarming traps and unlocking the treasure chest, Alexandro for holding the front line, and Hayes for the support her prayers had provided in battle. The guard found this surprising, since force parties formed for dungeon expeditions usually had nothing but complaints about one another. Hearing Keel's perspective, the guard decided to grant him entry into the territory, though he warned that any trouble would result in exile. The group accepted the conditions. The guard then presented them with a reward for clearing the dungeon, something that was not always guaranteed, since guards often confiscated such spoils. Keel accepted it and insisted the reward be divided fairly among all members. Though the others tried to decline, he reminded them they had all worked together as one party, and that fairness demanded everyone share in the reward. Reluctantly, they agreed. With that settled, Keel suggested they celebrate and proposed finding a pub nearby. His companions hesitated awkwardly at first, but then responded with forced laughter, agreeing to the idea despite their unease. Meanwhile, one of the guards observed Keel carefully. The man recognized that Keel had displayed power great enough to bring down a skeleton knight in a single blow. His strength was easily on par with a knight, perhaps greater. Yet he carried himself unlike any barbarian the guard had encountered, leading him to consider the possibility that this was no ordinary warrior, but the barbarian of legend, an existence outside of normal understanding. The guard decided the matter was important enough to report and left instructions for his team to remain on watch while he went to meet with his lord. Inside the castle, a servant entered the chamber of Luke Barkin, the lord of Barkin domain in the Gehent kingdom, and announced his presence. Luke Barkin turned to hear the report. The servant announced the arrival of the first captain of the Barkin Guard, who had come to report directly to Lord Luke Barkin. His message was simple but weighty. A barbarian had appeared within the domain. The captain admitted that he had already granted this barbarian permission to remain, judging at the time that it would not be an issue. When pressed by Luke Barkin to explain why it was now a problem, the captain gave his reasoning. This barbarian was unusually strong enough to potentially disrupt the balance of the territory. When asked to clarify, the captain explained that the barbarian had defeated a skeleton knight with a single strike. Luke Barkin immediately grasped the significance. Skeleton knights were monsters that no one below the level of a trained knight could hope to face, and yet this one had been destroyed effortlessly. The Lord's thoughts dwelled on the contradiction. Barbarians were supposed to be crude, ignorant beings who resolved all matters through strength, and yet here was one who might surpass even first-rate warriors. Luke Barkin asked directly whether this man was at the level of a first-rate fighter, and the captain answered that the likelihood was high. When pressed further on the possibility of the barbarian being even stronger, the captain admitted that he could not rule it out. This left Luke Barkin uneasy. The presence of such a figure in his territory could only be a source of instability, especially given the barbarian belief that might alone justified authority. After a moment of consideration, Luke Barkin gave his order. The barbarian was to be summoned at once. The captain questioned whether it was wise, but Luke Barkin reasoned that seeing this man for himself was necessary. Though there might be danger, he was confident with his knight at his side. He asked the captain's thoughts, and the man dismissed the threat, insisting that however powerful the barbarian might be, he was still just a brute without intelligence. Against the skill he himself had gained under the tutelage of a great swordmaster, he believed the barbarian would be nothing. With that, Luke Barkin repeated his command to summon Keel, resolving to speak with him directly. Meanwhile, Keel was with his companions at a small cafe. The group shared a meal in a quiet setting, and Keel expressed his appreciation for both the food and the atmosphere. He insisted on treating everyone, urging them to eat as much as they liked, which lightened the mood and drew laughter from his companions. As they ate, Keel turned his attention to the paladin, asking about his divine power. The paladin admitted somewhat reluctantly that he was still in training and had not yet awakened his abilities. Keel commented on the misfortune of that, leaving the young paladin slightly flustered. Keel then asked Hayes about her faith. She explained that she followed Kaloja, though there was unlikely to be a temple nearby. Inwardly, Hayes reflected on the nature of her deity. Kaloja was the god of lies and deceit, a figure shunned by most and rejected by the mainstream faiths. It was not a name welcomed in most lands, and she carried that burden silently as she traveled with the group. After their meal, Hayes hesitated for a moment before addressing Keel directly. With a faint sense of curiosity and unease, she asked him just how strong he truly was. Her words caught everyone off guard. Keel, the paladin, and Cain all reacted with visible surprise. Keel thought carefully before responding. He admitted that he wasn't entirely sure himself, since it hadn't been long since he left the snowfields, and he was still trying to gauge his own abilities. He then reflected on the fact that skeleton knights were not monsters that just anyone could face. At minimum, one needed to be considered second-rate to stand a chance. Hayes remarked that a first-rate warrior might be capable of defeating such a creature, much like Keel had. Taking her words into account, Keel considered this as the measure of his strength. Their exchange was soon interrupted when the shopkeeper politely reminded them that the establishment was closing. Keel apologized for the inconvenience and suggested that they take their leave. Before parting, he asked his companions if they had any plans or schedules. They all quickly affirmed that they did, with Cain adding, almost too eagerly, that they were extremely busy. Keel accepted their words at face value and, with calm composure, noted that this would be where they parted ways for now, though he hoped to see them again. At least one of them, however, quietly wished never to cross paths with him again. Later that night, Keel lay down to sleep. A small smile formed on his face as he stretched out on the bed, quietly appreciating its comfort. He reflected that this was likely the first time he had laid in a proper bed since his arrival in this world. With the dungeon reward he had earned, he was relieved that he could afford a room without issue. Compared to the harsh snowfields where he had first awakened, this felt like paradise. As he rested, his thoughts wandered. It had taken a long time to finally reach civilized lands, and now he wondered what he should do next. His heart leaned toward the idea of experiencing new places and challenges. He thought of the sacred grounds of the elves, the towering seat of arcane knowledge at the Magic Tower, and even the royal capital itself. What he desired most, he realized, was an adventure. With that thought, he drifted off in his sleep. His rest was interrupted by a visitor. The captain of the guard had come personally, announcing that the lord of the territory wished to meet him. Keel regarded the man calmly, acknowledging the weight of such a summons. The lord, after all, was the master of the land, and the fact that someone of such stature wanted to see him was not something to be taken lightly. Without hesitation, Keel agreed. He told the captain he would prepare himself and depart immediately. The guard, however, seemed unsettled by how easily Keel accepted the summons, quietly wondering if they had truly found the right man. As Keel walked through the territory on his way to the meeting, he reflected on his surroundings. The first time he had entered the domain, it had been night, and he had only managed a rough impression. Now, in the daylight, the streets and structures were far more vivid, alive with activity and detail. It was a sight that fascinated him, stirring within him a quiet appreciation. He thought to himself that if this was what people called a lucky fantasy, he would gladly accept it any time. As Keel was being led into the lord's castle, the captain of the guard carefully observed him. He was cautious, making sure to manage the situation and reduce the risk of unnecessary attention. Soon after, he stood before his lord and announced Keel's arrival. Luke Barkin, the lord of the territory, gave permission for Keel to enter. When Keel stepped forward, the lord greeted him formally, extending his hand to establish courtesy. He introduced himself as Luke Barkin, master of the territory within the Gehent Kingdom. Keel responded respectfully, acknowledging him as the rightful lord of the land and introducing himself, in turn, as the Barbarian Keel. His words and demeanor immediately unsettled Luke Barkin. In his mind, he noted how unusual it was barbarians, in his understanding, never bowed their heads. Their entire existence revolved around strength, not humility. For one to show manners was something he had never expected. Impressed yet cautious, Luke Barkin invited Keel to take a seat. Keel complied, and, as he settled in, he silently took in his surroundings. The interior of the Lord's castle had a distinctly medieval feel, just as he had once imagined such places would look in the fantasies of his youth. His attention then shifted to the knight who stood guard nearby. Keel regarded him with a childlike sense of admiration, recalling the games he once played as a boy. The sight of a real knight standing before him felt almost surreal. But while Keel looked on with curiosity, the knight interpreted his gaze very differently. The knight believed Keel was projecting unmistakable killing intent in the Lord's presence, an act that could only be seen as reckless and hostile. Convinced of danger, he quietly resolved that Keel would not leave the castle alive. Luke Barkin interrupted the tense undercurrent by speaking directly to Keel. He explained that the reason for summoning him was simple. There were matters he wished to confirm. Keel accepted this without hesitation, asking what the Lord wanted to know. The first question posed was about his origins. Keel responded calmly, though his answer carried weight. He said he came from the coldest of places, a world blanketed in snow and hardship. Both Luke Barkin and the guard captain reacted inwardly to this, realizing that his words aligned with the tales of the legendary barbarian said to emerge from the white snowfields. Now, that very figure stood before them in flesh and blood. Luke Barkin admitted that what Keel spoke of was difficult to believe. Keel, however, showed little concern. He stated plainly that the snowfields had been a miserable place, and whether the Lord chose to believe his story or not was irrelevant. The Lord then shifted his inquiry. What he truly wished to know was how strong Keel was. In his mind, the issue was not Keel's origin, but the level of danger his strength represented to the territory. Keel's reply was straightforward. He explained that such a question could not be answered directly, as he had no clear sense of how strength was measured in this land. Without that context, he could not properly compare himself to others. Hearing this, Luke Barkin acknowledged his point with a quiet acceptance, though his concerns remained. At that moment, the night guard noticed Keel's attitude. Then the king asked Keel, "In that case, how about a spar with my knight?" He promised Keel he would be rewarded well for it. Keel was shaken by those words and muttered, "Spar, huh?" The king quickly added that it wasn't a fight to the death and that he trusted Keel to keep it within reason. Keel smiled and answered, "Sounds good to me." The king was surprised by his response. Keel chuckled, "A spar with a knight." Keel then thought about the night guard. A knight, not just any knight. A fantasy world knight who wielded mystical power and aura. A chance to see such a being's technique up close. This was going to be exciting. On the other side, the king thought to himself, a barbarian is a barbarian after all. No matter how polite they act, they can't hide their savage love of battle. The next day, Keel and the knight headed to the battleground for the fight. As they faced each other, their eyes carried the weight of opponents. Then the king declared, "Then let's begin." Hopefully no blood is shed, that the trumpets were blown to start the battle. The knight spoke first, "Consider it an honor, barbarian, to witness my swordsmanship." Keel replied, "I prefer that too." The knight grew irritated at Keel's relaxed attitude and thought, how dare he? Acting so relaxed. I'll show him. The overwhelming difference in strength. He then charged at Keel, thinking, "Now then, what will you do, barbarian?" At that moment, Keel's eyes widened as he thought his sword. There are 3 of them. The knight charged at Keel, his sword splitting into 3. At first, Keel thought it was an illusion, but he quickly realized it wasn't. All 3 swords were real. Keel understood then, this was true swordsmanship. The knight pressed his attack, convinced that Keel barely dodging by a hair's breadth was the best he could manage. To the knight, even that seemed impressive, but he believed there was no need to continue watching. However, in the next instant, Keel calmly blocked the strike with just one finger. The knight froze, stunned, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Before the knight could recover, Keel struck back with a single punch. The blow was so powerful that the knight was sent flying across the ground. Luke Barkin stood up in shock, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. He screamed in disbelief, shaken by the overwhelming sight. With just one strike, Keel had defeated a first-class knight. Luke Barkin trembled at the realization. This was power beyond normal limits, monstrous strength that seemed superhuman at the very least. And yet, he knew this was only the surface. The true depths of Keel's power were unknown. A barbarian with such strength could very well tip the balance of the world. Keel, calm and unbothered, simply smiled and asked if the match was already over. Luke Barkin confirmed it, though his thoughts still raced. As he considered what he had seen, Luke Barkin decided it might be time to involve someone else, one of the few in the world who bore the title of swordmaster. He thought to himself that the man should have arrived by now and wondered if such a figure would take interest in Keel. Then a voice answered his thoughts. The swordmaster Cain appeared, casually asking if Luke had met his interest. Turning, Luke greeted him with a remark that Cain's questionable taste in hobbies hadn't changed. Cain only laughed, saying that everyone needed some entertainment in life. With that, Cain pressed further, asking Luke what this so-called interesting matter was about. Luke, recognizing the weight of the moment, formally greeted him. He said it was an honor to have Cain visit on such short notice and respectfully addressed him as the great swordmaster. Master Cain and Luke Barkin sat with heavy expressions, the atmosphere tense. Nearby, the injured knight guard groaned in pain, clutching his body. Luke Barkin turned to him and asked if his condition had improved. The guard, still struggling, assured his lord that he should recover in a few days and apologize for his failure. Before Luke could say more, Master Cain cut in sharply, stating that the apology should be directed to him instead. His tone was harsh as he declared that his foolish disciple had lost to an unknown barbarian. The night guard, shaken, tried to defend himself. He muttered that not a single wound had been inflicted on Keel. He recalled how he had seen Keel's armor completely destroyed earlier, and by its state, it would not have been strange if Keel had died in that battle. Yet now, aside from a few torn clothes, Keel's body was entirely unharmed. The knight's mind raced as he wondered if the barbarian had deliberately shown restraint. Master Cain confirmed his suspicion. He explained that Keel was no mere barbarian, but someone capable of controlling his strength with incredible precision. The knight could only respond weakly, stunned by the realization. Cain continued, pointing out that this very restraint meant Keel far surpassed the level of an ordinary knight, reaching at least the level of a superhuman. Both Luke Barkin and the knight stiffened at his words, disturbed by the thought of such power. Luke hesitated, then cautiously asked Master Cain how Keel compared to him. Cain's reply carried an air of confidence. While Keel may be strong, he himself was a swordmaster. Even if Keel wielded superhuman strength, he declared, he could not reach the level of a swordmaster. Luke accepted his words, though he remained unsettled. Cain then thought aloud, noting that Keel had not used aura during the fight, yet he still displayed overwhelming power. Such a feat was impossible through ordinary means. He wondered if this was the true power of a barbarian from the White Snowfield. Luke's thoughts echoed his conclusion. At first, he had doubted Keel's origins, but now he began to accept it. Keel truly seemed to have come from the legendary Snowfield. Cain silently reflected as well. A barbarian of the Snowfield, a human who had endured and emerged from that unforgiving White Wasteland, was now standing before them. Master Cain's thoughts lingered on Keel. He questioned within himself whether Keel was truly human, or perhaps something else entirely, maybe even a heteromorph. But he quickly dismissed the idea. If Keel were a heteromorph, he reasoned, he would not have shown any restraint or consideration toward humans. He admitted to himself that it must have been his own misjudgment. Still, the fact that Keel came from the White Snowfield weighed heavily on him. Why from there and why now? The timing troubled him. Luke Barkin noticed Cain's moment of silence and asked if something was wrong. Cain replied that it was nothing urgent, only a matter for later. He mentioned the Emperor as well, hinting that such matters often arose from the Emperor's strange requests. With a sigh, Cain told Luke that it was not something to concern himself with at the present. Luke, unsettled but respectful, acknowledged his words. Shifting the subject, Cain asked if the barbarian was still within the territory. Luke confirmed that Keel had said he would remain, so he believed he was still there. Cain, after a pause, remarked that he should confirm it for himself. The next day, someone stood speaking in front of the kingdom, asking Keel what he planned to do now. Keel paused in thought, answering vaguely. At that moment, the guard's captain stepped forward, handing him a pouch of gold coins. He explained that it was the reward for the duel, a gift directly from Lord Luke Barkin. He also added that from this point onward, he would no longer interfere with Keel's activities in the territory. Keel admitted he hadn't decided on anything specific yet, but he mentioned it would be convenient to have an officially recognized identity. Without one, every time he entered a new territory, especially when it came to dungeon entry, it could become troublesome. The captain considered his words carefully and explained that there were two main paths. One way was to have someone of high status sponsor him, vouching for his identity. The other option was to become a mercenary. Curious, Keel asked about the second option. The captain told him that if he became a mercenary and built up achievements through the guild, his identity would eventually be acknowledged. Privately, the captain thought to himself that mercenaries without enough achievements were treated as little more than errand boys, and with strength like Keel's, a sponsor would normally be the most fitting path. Keel, however, grew intrigued by the idea of becoming a mercenary. To him, the very word carried the essence of fantasy itself, taking on requests, slaying monsters, and living out the romance of adventure. Smiling, he asked where he needed to go to become one. The captain, caught off guard by his enthusiasm, stammered slightly before telling him there was a guild hall. Without hesitation, Keel asked him to guide the way. The guard's captain explained to Keel that mercenaries were drifters who roamed the world taking on various requests. While some people saw them as symbols of romantic ideals, the reality was far less glamorous. Mercenaries were considered the lowest rung of society, people without any official status. Even those who possessed some strength often died in unexplored dungeons, and more often than not they became scapegoats for dirty work. Because of this, the bottom tier of mercenary society was crude, filthy, and noisy. Elsewhere, inside the mercenary guild hall, a commotion was taking place. A man dressed in blue struck his opponent, shouting in anger for daring to touch him. His opponent collapsed to the ground in pain, but despite that, he shouted back with equal rage, challenging him further. The man in blue screamed back, daring him to come at him again. Around them, the other mercenaries fueled the fight, placing bets on who would win, treating the chaos like entertainment. At the receptionist's desk, a woman with pink hair asked Rosa, the guild's receptionist, how the new recruits were. Rosa sighed, clearly disappointed, saying they were hopeless and nothing but oddballs. She explained that among the newcomers were a self-proclaimed holy knight, a thief, and even a nun. Although the nun herself seemed fine, no one trusted her because of the god she worshipped. The pink-haired woman reacted with pity, calling to shame, but Rosa could only think to herself how no decent people ever seemed to show up, and how the mercenaries around her constantly picked fights. Deep down, she wished a handsome prince on a white horse would someday appear and free her from her post at the reception desk. At that moment, Rosa noticed someone approaching. She was shaken to see who it was, Keel entering the guild hall. The mercenaries inside the hall immediately reacted in shock, whispering among themselves about a barbarian walking in. Keel calmly looked around and then approached Rosa, telling her that he had come because he wanted to become a mercenary. Rosa, nervous at his presence, asked for his purpose in becoming one. Keel explained that there were various reasons, but most importantly, he had heard that by working as a mercenary, he could gain official status. Rosa confirmed that this was true, but told him that recognition required significant achievements. She asked if that would be acceptable, to which Keel agreed without hesitation. Rosa then began his registration, informing him that it required 5 silver coins, as well as his name and age. Keel introduced himself as Keel, but admitted that he wasn't sure about his age. Rosa noted something approximate and completed the process, handing him a mercenary badge. She explained that the badge symbolized his new status and that he must never lose it. Keel looked at the badge and firmly accepted it, then immediately asked about available requests, eager to begin at once. Rosa, still nervous, showed him a note listing the available requests for his rank. As an F-rank mercenary, Keel found the tasks limited to menial jobs such as herb gathering, basement cleaning, sewer cleanup, street cleaning, and night patrol. Shocked at the simplicity of the list, Keel wondered if that was truly all there was. Rosa explained carefully that since he was only F rank, these were the only requests he could take for now. In her mind, she worried about how a barbarian, known for their pride, might react to such degrading work. She even considered whether she should call for help if he lashed out. Instead, she explained further that by completing these simple tasks and gradually building a record, he would eventually become eligible for more difficult requests. Keel accepted this calmly, choosing one of the tasks without complaint. Rosa looked stunned when Keel accepted the simple request without hesitation. She asked if he was truly certain, but Keel calmly explained that it was just work that needed to be done, so there was no problem. Seeing his composed response, Rosa could only acknowledge it quietly. Keel then asked her where the herbs could be found. Rosa handed him a paper with a simple drawing of the plants and explained that they were located outside the village. Keel smiled as he took the paper, assuring her he would return shortly. Rosa, watching him leave so casually, was left wondering to herself why he seemed so unervingly calm. Outside the guild, Rosa and the pink-haired woman both remained uneasy after his departure. Meanwhile, Keel compared the paper to the plants he found, carefully studying them. He thought about how unusual the herbs looked and questioned whether they were meant for treating wounds. Preparing himself, he removed his upper clothing and considered it his protection from the sun, ready to begin his first mission as a mercenary. An hour later, Keel returned to the guild hall with his harvest. Rosa was visibly shocked by what he brought back. Keel asked her if the amount he had gathered would be sufficient. She was stunned, realizing he had collected far more than expected. At first, she even wondered if he had ruined the herb field, but upon closer inspection, she noticed they were in perfect condition. Unlike most mercenaries, who usually ripped the herbs carelessly and broke the stems, Keel had managed to gather them with precision. When Rosa commented on this, Keel simply explained that despite his appearance, he had always been confident in his delicate touch. Rosa acknowledged this awkwardly, impressed in spite of herself, and handed him a silver coin as his payment. She thanked him for his hard work and explained that this was the standard reward for the request. As Keel looked at the coin, he realized it was barely enough to buy the cheapest meal. Still, he reflected that it was the first money he had ever earned honestly through work, and the thought moved him. He told Rosa he was satisfied with it and immediately asked if he could take another request right away. Rosa was caught off guard. In her mind, she questioned how he could possibly be content with such a small reward. She thought to herself that this barbarian was unlike any mercenary she had seen before. But Keel, smiling, explained that since the sun was still high, he wanted to work as much as he could. Watching him speak with such genuine happiness, Rosa couldn't understand why he seemed so content. Her eyes welled up with tears, and though touched, she concluded that even this new mercenary was strange in his own way. Rosa handed Keel the list of available requests and pointed out another one, suggesting he take it next. Keel accepted with a smile, thinking to himself that after the herb gathering, this would already be his third cleaning task. Watching him, Rosa couldn't help but wonder if barbarians might actually enjoy cleaning. Despite her uncertainty, she formally asked for his help with the task. Keel then set off to the designated location, where an elderly woman was waiting. He explained that he had come to clean the warehouse. At first, the old woman seemed startled, questioning whether he was truly the one assigned to the job. When he confirmed, she nervously admitted that she was indeed the owner of the warehouse, all the while thinking in shock about the idea of a barbarian being tasked with such work. For Keel, however, the task was straightforward. Cleaning the warehouse posed no challenge, and moving the items inside was simple with his strength. His next request took him to the streets, where he picked up a broom and began sweeping. Controlling his power at first was tricky, but he adjusted quickly and managed to complete the task without causing any damage. From a distance, someone was observing him through binoculars. This figure was puzzled, questioning why someone with such obvious strength would waste time on menial chores. In his mind, he reasoned that Keel was clearly at least superhuman, with enough power to influence an entire kingdom if he wished. By simply revealing his abilities, he could have been welcomed and celebrated anywhere. And yet, instead of flaunting that strength, The barbarian was seriously dedicating himself to trivial tasks. Not half-heartedly, but with genuine focus and commitment. The observer was none other than Master Cain. As he continued watching, he struggled to understand Keel's choices. In his thoughts, he wondered why Keel found fulfillment in such simple work, unable to comprehend what drove him to act this way. The next afternoon, Keel woke up and stretched his body, letting out a low groan. As he set one foot down from the bed, his eyes caught sight of the small bag of coins, making him pause for a moment in thought. Later, he went to see Rosa and opened the bag in front of her. She acknowledged his effort, telling him that he had done well on his first day as a mercenary. For completing 15 requests, his reward amounted to 15 silver coins. Keel accepted it with a smile, thanking her before mentioning that he would return the following day, ready to begin what he considered his second day of civilized life. As he stepped outside, a small child burst into tears at the sight of him, drawing startled reactions from those nearby. While others looked shaken, Keel's attention shifted toward a building he noticed, what appeared to be a library. Curious, he walked inside. The attendant greeted him, but froze in fear as Keel asked if he could read some books. Without waiting for more hesitation, he picked one up and began reading, while the attendant stood nervously, still shaken by his presence. Unbeknownst to Keel, Master Cain was watching from the shadows, sensing his presence clearly even without seeing him directly. He was struck with disbelief at what he witnessed. The so-called savage barbarian was calmly reading a book. Cain questioned whether snowfield barbarians were more refined than others, or if Keel himself was an unusual exception. After some time, Keel closed the book, and his thoughts wandered back to past memories. He recalled Milina, who had once come to the snowfield years ago. She had said she was traveling to a kingdom at war with the Empire to sell weapons. Looking at the records now, Keel realized that the Empire had been the victor in that conflict. Its current power was overwhelming, strong enough to reduce the Barcan kingdom to little more than a vassal state. The Empire had already consumed half of the human world and continued its relentless expansion, as though intent on swallowing the world entirely. While continuing his reading, Keel reflected that the Empire's hunger for power seemed no different than seeking world domination. Yet, he brushed aside those human affairs for the moment. What truly interested him now was knowledge of the non-human races. He picked up another book, one that compiled records of non-human beings. As he went through its pages, he realized the fantastical entries written there were not myths but realities of this world. It spoke of the dwarven cave, Gulmantamia, described as the richest cavern in existence, overflowing with rare minerals as if they were worthless debris. There was the fairy village, Pisarapia, and the aerial city of the Celestials, Legemeria, floating high above. Most fascinating of all was the holy sanctuary of the elves, Elfo Sagrada. It was said to be unreachable, its location a complete mystery. Even the most powerful had attempted to find it, but all had failed. Keel paused at this point, recognizing that his own experiences might have granted him the extraordinary right to step into places even such as the elf sanctuary. Turning another page, something caught his attention. It mentioned the existence of other domains similar to the White Snowfield, demon realms. These were regions where humans could not survive, filled with twisted beings and anomalies. The text described 5 vast demon realms: the Forest of Silence, which absorbed all sound and life; the Abyss, which dragged the world into endless darkness; the Deep Sea, where strange life thrived beneath crushing waters; the Deep Hole, a void where nothing existed; and the White Snowfield, a place he already knew too well. Within these realms lived terrifying creatures known as anomalies. Fortunately, the text clarified that demon realms could not extend their reach into the human world. Keel leaned back, reflecting on the scale of the world itself. Even the White Snowfield alone was enormous. Yet to think that multiple such domains existed left him questioning the true vastness of the world. With that, he closed the book, concluding that the library contained all the information it had to offer on the subject. Standing up, he thanked the attendant with a faint smile for the help. The attendant, visibly nervous but relieved, managed to smile back and assure him it was no trouble. The following day, Keel returned to the guild hall. With his usual calm demeanor, he asked Rosa if there were any requests available. She was caught off guard by his sudden appearance, addressing him nervously yet respectfully before handing over the request form. Elsewhere in the hall, unseen by them, Master Cain observed quietly. He noted once again how unusual Keel was, unlike any barbarian he had known. Concluding that simple surveillance would no longer suffice, Cain resolved that he would have to meet Keel face to face. At night, Keel walked through the village road with a smile, reflecting on the day's work. He was satisfied, knowing he had completed over a dozen requests. Even though they were small jobs, together they added up nicely, making his efforts profitable. In his mind, he believed that if he continued at this steady pace, the day when he would be recognized as a true mercenary would not be far away. From the shadows, Master Cain had been watching him closely. After a while, Cain stepped out from his hiding place and appeared in front of Keel. The sudden appearance left Keel momentarily shaken. He quickly confronted the man, accusing him of following him around throughout the entire day. Cain was caught off guard by this, stunned that Keel had noticed him. He thought to himself in disbelief, as he had deliberately hidden his presence using aura. Under normal circumstances, no one should have been able to sense him, no matter how sharp their instincts were. Keel, misinterpreting Cain's silence, demanded to know his business. Then, growing more agitated, he accused Cain of being a bandit. His sharp tone and suspicion only deepened when Cain failed to respond immediately, which Keel took as confirmation. Even in a place with decent security, he reasoned there could still be bandits lurking. Cain denied the accusation, but his words seemed uncertain. Internally, he wondered whether Keel would believe him if he revealed himself to be his swordmaster. Keel pressed on, questioning whether Cain had truly turned to robbery in his old age, remarking with a hint of mockery that the economy must be in a very poor state if that were the case. With a smirk, Keel thought to himself that capturing someone like Cain could count as a good achievement for his career. Cain, startled by Keel's confidence, reconsidered the situation. Perhaps this misunderstanding could work to his advantage. If Keel truly believed he was facing a bandit, then confronting him directly might be the best way to gauge his strength and uncover his identity. In an instant, Keel appeared right in front of Cain, moving as if he had vanished and reappeared. Cain was shaken, realizing he had lost sight of him for a brief moment. His shock deepened when Keel suddenly reached out his hand toward him, aiming directly for the back of his neck. Sensing the danger, Cain reacted instinctively. He struck Keel to stop him, thinking that if he stayed still for even a moment longer, Keel's hand would have grabbed hold of him. The force of the hit made Keel slide back slightly, but instead of being upset, Keel only smiled with a confident attitude. He acknowledged Cain's speed, remarking on it with a calm amusement. Cain, however, was unsettled. He realized Keel had nearly caught him, and if his reflexes had been just a fraction slower, he would have been captured. What shocked him more was that he had felt no aura flowing from Keel's body at all, despite the incredible speed and precision of his movements. Keel continued to watch him with the same calm smile, intrigued by the encounter. Cain analyzed the situation again, realizing that Keel had moved with nothing but his physical body, without any trace of aura. To him, this was no longer a simple test. It was something far more dangerous. Determined, Cain made his move. He closed the distance between them at full speed, intent on going all out. But as he advanced, Keel effortlessly caught him with one hand. Cain was stunned. He had already extended his senses, yet he still could not react in time. Pain shot through him as Keel's grip tightened. It wasn't simply the feeling of being grabbed. It felt as though his arm had been trapped within a boulder, his entire body being forcibly dragged by an overwhelming force. The pain grew unbearable, and Cain could only scream as he realized the extent of Keel's strength. No matter how much he resisted, he couldn't compete in raw power. With no other option left, Cain decided he would have to unleash his full strength and release his power. At that moment, Keel was caught off guard when Master Cain suddenly released a powerful light. He paused, blinking in confusion. A strange glow wrapped around Cain, radiating like condensed energy. Keel narrowed his eyes, muttering to himself in surprise. Light? What kind of trick was this? Almost immediately, Cain managed to break free from Keel's grip, slipping out as if shielded by magic. Keel regarded him with a tilted smile, dismissing the display. In his mind, it was nothing more than another trick of a petty thief. Bandits these days seem to have all sorts of unusual techniques hidden up their sleeves. But Cain's thoughts were filled with frustration. Why did this barbarian keep calling him a bandit? The energy surrounding him wasn't some cheap trick. It was the materialization of mana itself. Only those who had reached the pinnacle of elite warriors could perform it. The idea that someone of his stature would stoop to robbery was absurd. Yet Keel seemed absolutely convinced. Still, Cain couldn't deny the unease building inside him. Materialized mana was powerful enough to slice through hardened steel without effort. A mere human body should have been torn apart the moment it touched it. But Keel? He stood there completely unscathed, not even a single scratch on his skin. The realization shook him to his core. Just what was this body made of? How could anyone withstand such a force with bare flesh alone? Keel's expression shifted to one of calm confidence as he looked at Cain. Whatever strange technique his opponent was using, it didn't matter. He decided it was time to put an end to this encounter. Cain instinctively reached for his sword, ready to unleash his full power. But before he could even draw it, Keel moved in front of him in an instant, treating the weapon like a mere toy. Cain froze, utterly shaken by how easily Keel had dismissed his swordplay. Grinding his teeth in anger, Cain forced himself to try again, desperately attempting to draw his blade. Yet once more, Keel closed the distance effortlessly, reaching for him before he could react. In that instant, Cain's thoughts turned grim. He realized this was the end for him. The speed, the strength, the unnatural resilience, there was nothing he could do. Keel seized him without hesitation, lifting him as if he weighed nothing and slinging him over his shoulder. With a satisfied hum, he glanced at his subdued opponent and mused to himself. So this was what a bandit in a fantasy world looked like. Keel arrived at the kingdom's palace, carrying Master Cain by the robe as if hauling a captured criminal. The guard stationed at the entrance froze in shock at the sight. The captain of the guard stepped forward, staring wide-eyed at the scene. "Be a barbarian. What is this?" His voice trembled, unable to believe what he was seeing. His thoughts raced in panic. What on earth was going on? Why was Swordmaster Cain here of all places? Could it be, had the barbarian actually attacked the Swordmaster? If that were true, what would become of the kingdom now? Breaking through his confusion, the captain suddenly shouted, his voice cracking. "I caught a thief." The guards around him stared in disbelief. "A thief?" Keel, standing tall, answered plainly. If he handed this man over to the guards, that would count as mercenary work, wouldn't it? The captain could only stare, his mind spinning. What kind of scene was this? A man who had reached the very heights of superhuman strength, the swordmaster Cain himself, was being dragged in like a common criminal by a barbarian. And not just dragged, but humiliated, his status crumbling in the eyes of all who saw. Finally, the captain forced himself to speak. "He's not a thief." Keel turned his head slightly, his voice calm but firm. So the captain knew this man? That only made it sound like he was an accomplice to the criminal. The captain hurriedly straightened his posture, speaking with formality. "The only sword master of the Gehentra kingdom. I greet you, Sword Master Cain." Keel froze for a moment, his expression tightening. Swordmaster, a title filled with weight and grandeur. And yet, the man had attacked him like a thief. "That's impossible," Keel stated coldly. "He is a thief. He attacked me for my silver coins." But the captain shook his head, his voice steady. "No, he really is the Swordmaster. There's no way I mistake that face." Keel's eyes narrowed. "Unless it's a sorcerer disguising his face." The captain quickly countered. "But if he's that high level of a mage, then he'd already be respected like a swordmaster anyway." Keel looked at the guard's captain with suspicion, questioning if Swordmaster was nothing more than a nickname used by thieves. The captain stared at him in disbelief, demanding what on earth he was even saying. Keel pressed the question again, asking if the man was truly a swordmaster, and the captain confirmed it without hesitation. The captain then turned serious, saying he would report the matter to the Lord immediately. When Luke Barkin heard the report, he was visibly shaken. He could barely believe the words. Lord Cain, the swordmaster, had been defeated. Realizing the misunderstanding, Keel turned to Cain and offered an apology, admitting that he should have listened to the full story before acting. Cain, however, accepted part of the blame himself, saying it was also his fault for not speaking up. Meanwhile, Luke Barkin's thoughts churned with unease. The situation was beyond anything he had anticipated. He had expected that Lord Cain might seek out the Barbarian for a duel, but never had he imagined that Cain would lose. The reality was undeniable. Cain had been defeated, which meant the Barbarian was stronger than a swordmaster. Luke Barkin reflected on the fact that while Cain had only recently attained the title and was likely at the lowest level among the superhuman class, he was still a swordmaster, an individual who bore one of the most prestigious titles in existence, a true master of the sword. For a barbarian to overcome such a figure, it could only mean that this man was entirely beyond control. The thought gave him a headache. Deciding not to meddle further, Luke Barkin excused himself, noting that it seemed there had been some kind of misunderstanding. He suggested the two men have a private conversation and left them to it. Later, Cain sat across from Keel, drinking tea as he brooded over the outcome of their clash. The humiliation weighed heavily on him. His defeat had been so absolute, so flawless, that there was no room for excuses. His pride hadn't just been damaged, it had been shredded completely. Setting down his cup, Cain finally spoke, properly introducing himself as Cain, the swordmaster. Keel, still not entirely grasping the weight of the title, asked if Cain's last name was truly swordmaster. Cain shook his head and clarified that once one ascended to the realm of swordmaster, a surname no longer held any meaning. Keel questioned Master Cain about whether the technique he had shown earlier truly belonged to a swordmaster. Cain confirmed by demonstrating his power again, causing Keel to be visibly shaken. He realized that what he had dismissed as a mere thief's technique was in fact something far more fascinating when he learned it was a swordmaster skill. Cain explained that this was the manifestation of the mystic, also called aura. Keel, curious, asked if it could be learned, to which Cain explained that it required controlling the mystic and manifesting it. Keel compared it to mana, and Cain clarified that mystic energy itself was the source. When used as aura, it belonged to swordsmen, and when used as mana, it belonged to mages. Realizing both mages and swordsmen could use mystic, Keel eagerly asked Cain to teach him the technique. Cain was shaken by the request, questioning why someone stronger than him would seek his guidance. Keel admitted that while he had strength, he lacked knowledge of mystic or swordsmanship, relying only on raw power. This surprised Cain, who reflected on his own pride as a swordmaster, acknowledging that he had been defeated without even drawing his sword. Determined to restore his pride, Cain decided to teach Keel the way of the sword, believing it would allow him to show the true greatness of swordsmanship. Cain then declared that without his sword he was nothing, admitting that his strength lay in wielding it. Keel noted that this explained why Cain had seemed weaker before, since he had not used his sword in their clash. Though Cain agreed, Keel still found it strange that someone with such power would be called a sword master despite the outcome. Cain grew frustrated at the implication, especially when Keel remarked that perhaps Cain might have one had he used his sword. This left Cain conflicted, questioning whether merely drawing his sword would truly have changed the result. Still, Keel expressed that he looked forward to seeing it. Cain's pride wavered as he resolved to recover his self-esteem, though deep inside he felt an unease, fearing that he might end up being crushed even worse.